When life seems to shrink, when time seems to shrink, when our location seems to shrink, as has been happening in these last months during this pandemic, when we're not on a big stage anymore, it seems, our lives are a little bit smaller. What can God do with small things? You may remember, if you've watched our videos on our website before, that some weeks ago I showed you a plant out on our patio, a ginger plant that was cut way back during the winter, almost as if the roots were destroyed. There was hardly anything there, just little tiny roots. And I said, that's going to grow. And it grew and grew and grew until, what do we see now? Look at this big, flourishing plant, a small thing that has become great. God's a God who often uses things that are small for his great purposes, but he doesn't want us to live for too small a thing. So what would it be to live for something that's not too small? When we began our ministry, our Leighton Ford ministries, it's hard to believe that's 35 years ago, there were two verses from Isaiah's prophecy that spoke powerfully to me. One was Isaiah 43, where I heard someone quote it during a time of prayer. God says, don't remember the former things, don't dwell in the past, I'm doing a new thing. And that came to my heart that God is, in our life, was going to do something new in reaching and lifting up younger leaders around the world. But also I was reading from Isaiah 49, and there's some words that just seem to leap off that page to me when the Lord says, it's too small a thing to be my servant for Jacob and Israel. Those little words, too small a thing, too small a thing, just seem to leap out and grab my heart. What was too small a thing? What was God calling us to in our ministry, to live for, to give ourselves to? What about you and me, even in these times when it seems things are shrinking down? Well, let me read you this fascinating passage, because Isaiah 49 is the servant of the Lord speaking it. It's almost an autobiography, thousands of years before the Lord Messiah, Jesus himself, came. Here's what he says. Listen to me, O coastlands. Pay attention, you people from far away. The Lord called me before I was born. When I was in my mother's womb, he named me. This is his story. God preempted my life before I was born. He gave me a name. That's important to me because, as you probably know, I'm adopted. My birth name was Peter Morgan Mahaffey. I was adopted as Leighton Frederick Sanders Ford, so that name is important. Jesus said, I call my sheep by name. Each one of us, our name has been called. And the Lord's servant said, before I was born, he called me and named me. Then he prepared me from my birth. He made my mouth like a sharp sword, and in the shadow of his hand he hid me, like a beautiful sword, perfectly shaped, sharpened, ready for war. And then he says he made me a polished arrow in his quiver, and he hid me away. Again, if you can see an arrow, beautifully shaped out of wood, feathered, pointed, in the quiver until the archer pulls the arrow out to shoot toward the target. He prepared my life from my birth. Wasn't that true of Jesus? 30 years in the carpenter's shop, fashioning things himself, being fashioned, until the Lord had 3 years of ministry. And the Lord puts many of us through times, maybe a time like this when it seems like nothing much is happening, but God is shaping us, preparing us for what ministry yet is to come, more than we can imagine. So, he preempted my life before I was born. He prepared me from my birth. Then he said he gave to me a high purpose. He said, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Listen to this. The Lord is saying, God is saying to his servant, I chose my people, but all of Israel was compressed down into one person, the servant of the Lord, the Son of God, who came among us, one life in a very distant place, and he gave me a high purpose. God gave me that great purpose. And that purpose was that he will glorify him. Jesus, to all of Israel, down to one person. So, he gave me a high purpose, but then he says he allowed me to go through deep pain. He says, I've labored in vain. I've spent my strength for nothing and vanity. I almost hear there an echo from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? He allowed his own son to go through deep pain and suffering. Remember, Jesus said, Father, if possible, I don't want to bring this cup. Let it pass from me. But the Father said, you must drink it. And he did. He allowed me to go through deep pain. Yet he says, surely my cause is with the Lord and my reward with my God. Amazing story, isn't it? Preempted before birth, prepared from birth, shaped for God's purpose, given this high purpose, allowed to go through deep pain. There's something that God does through suffering that I think doesn't happen any other way. Someone once said, God had one son without sin. He has no sons or daughters without suffering. Jesus had neither sin, but he did have suffering. And God does something. I don't think we can yet see in the midst of this pandemic what God may be doing through his church throughout the world, purifying us, kind of like this plant I mentioned. It was a little thing that grew, pruning us for his purposes. It is a time, we have it here in North America, much of the developed world. We're set off. We can't go out and do this or that. We're limited. But how many Christians there are throughout the world who are suffering through pain, through suffering, through persecution? Last year it's estimated that up to 90,000 Christians lost their life as martyrs. Now, it may not have been that many. It depends how you read the figures. Some of them were parts of civil conflict. But a huge number. It's estimated 900 million believers have suffered, in many cases died for their faith over the last 10 years. It's a church under the cross, as it was for Jesus. God allows that to happen, but for a purpose, that his cause might be carried forth. So, he goes on to say, because of this, preempted, prepared, given this purpose, allowed to go through this pain, why? He says, it is one translation is too light a thing. This one is, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations. It's too small a thing, not just for Israel, not just for the Jewish people, but for the nations. I'll give you a light to the nations that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Amazing. So when you think of what's not too small a thing, I would say nothing is big enough unless it's for the glory of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ. The biggest income, the biggest church, the biggest business, the biggest career, the biggest anything. Nothing is big enough if it's not done for the glory of God and the global purpose of Jesus. Now, on the other hand, the smallest thing is big enough when it is done for the glory of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, look at the small things perhaps you and I can do right now, but think of this. Are my prayers big enough? So, Tony Campola tells about when his son was young. He was all ready for bed one night in his pajamas, came down to the family and said, getting ready to go to bed now. I'll say my prayers. Anybody want anything? So many of our prayers are just, anybody want anything? But Psalm 2 says, ask me and I will give you the nations for your inheritance. Maybe our prayers in this time shouldn't just be, Lord, help me to get through this pandemic. But Lord, I pray for my friend Safir in India, or I pray for my friend Ramesh in Egypt, where they're working through hard things, but you're opening the doors of the gospel. I think of one of our mentorees over in Italy, church planter with her husband, who says, young people are turning as never before. Lord, bless them over there. Are my prayers big enough? Is our worship big enough? I've worshiped in little Indian churches, little men on one side, women on the other, very colorful. And I've worshiped in big cathedrals. But it's not whether it's a small or a big church, but is the church there not just for our purpose, but God's instrument to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth? Maybe that's going to happen through the great migrations that are taking place. Europe, for example, many refugees from Africa have come there and started churches preaching the gospel where the churches were empty before. We ought to be praying for that. What about my giving? Is my giving big enough? When we were in India some years ago, I met a teacher in the south of India. They don't make much money, but she was raising chickens for the gospel. She had her chickens in her backyard, and each one of them she named for one state of India. This was for Bhopal, this was for Kerala, this was for whatever state. And when she called them by name, the Bihar chickens would come, or the ones from some other state would come. And she said, those ones from up in that state, their eggs go for the missionaries to take the gospel. How does that compare to what you and I do? So is that big enough? What about our families? I'm praying for a granddaughter going off to college this year, praying for another one, just turned 15, changing schools. Are they going to be virtual? Are they going to be in person? I pray for them. God will help them to grow, to be strong in their faith. But if I said, Lord, my family is yours, take them and use them for something that's big enough for your cause. Gina and I have a friend, Colleen Evans. She was a beautiful actress, came to Christ many years ago in Hollywood. She gave up her acting career, but she served the Lord in so many ways. Married to Lou Evans, who was a pastor in Washington for years. She was the chairman of Billy Graham's crusade in Washington. She was a member of the board of World Vision with me. She did many things like that. But what I remember is that Mother Teresa came to Washington. She went to hear her. And after it was over, she was so moved by Mother Teresa, this little woman who cared for the dying poor in Calcutta. And Colin said to her, Mother, I hear what you're doing. What can I do? And Mother Teresa looked at her. And remember, Colin had done many things. She said, are you married? Yes. Do you have children? Yes. Well, she said, go home. Love your husband. Love your children. Is our family big enough? And our vision, is our vision big enough? Pray for a vision big enough for God's purpose in the world. We said on the day of Pentecost, the old men will dream dreams, the old men will see visions, and the young men will dream dreams. Our son Sandy had a dream. He had a dream for his life to count for Christ. He wrote in his journal, this is our son who died during heart surgery and was 21, loved Jesus. He said, some boys don't have dreams, but I do. I have bigger dreams. Maybe they're too big. I don't want to narrow them, but I hate to. He didn't stop dreaming. I want to see young people today who have a vision for the world. And I also want to tell you about an old man. I'm a little bit older, but this is an old Japanese man that I met over there in Tokyo. I was preaching there years ago for a youth conference, and on the Saturday night, there were hundreds of young people who came, and I called for those who wanted to commit their lives to Christ, to serve Him wherever God wanted them, and many of them came forward at the front. And the next day, we were leaving, and the sponsor of that conference was a Japanese businessman named Mr. Mimuru. He had helped to raise the money to pay for this. I can't remember what he's in, some sort of engineering factory that he had, but he'd been fairly successful. He insisted on going to the airport with us. And I said, well, Mr. Mimuru, now he was older, he was kind of bowed over, gray head, and I said, it's very nice of you, but it's a long ride, you don't have to do this. He's had very little English. He said, no, I want to go with you, very polite as the Japanese are. And we got out to the airport there outside Tokyo, and I could tell him, before he got back in the bus to go back to the city, I could tell he wanted to say something. So I just looked at him for a long time, and he said, Dr. Ford, that sort of Japanese accent, he said, last night, young people over there. I said, yes. He said, they came down to say yes to Jesus. Yes, I said, that's right. He said, I felt like St. Thomas, who took the gospel to India. Very important. And then he said, vision, world vision. I thought he was talking about being on the board of World Vision. He wasn't. He was talking about wanting to have a vision for the world. And I'll never forget him. He was much shorter than I am, sort of bent over, and he took his hands like this, and he said, wider, wider, wider. He was 73, 74 years of age. He was saying, I want to have a wider vision for your kingdom, Lord. If we really love God's kingdom, let's not live for too small a thing. Whatever it is that God has given to us, let it be for the glory of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ, not too small a thing.